My name is Eugene. I'm a history enthusiast from Chicago, and I'd like to thank Christopher Lawrence and the Institute for the invitation. And today we're going to be talking about German theater for the economics in World War II, particularly Battle of the Kursk. And the reason I'm interested in that subject is actually Christopher Lawrence. I was reading his book, Battle of the Kursk, and it's a very thorough book. And I wanted to follow action basically like hour by hour, unit by unit. And he has a beautiful section of German theater reconnaissance photographs right in the middle of the book. But when I tried to dive in, even with the magnifying glass, it was really hard to make out positions or even lines of defense. So I knew at that point I have to get them for myself. I have to somehow get those photographs, be able to look at them and see what they hide and what they offer. So a few weeks later, and many phone calls and some research, I was actually not holding my digital file with the photograph. And when I opened it, it changed my world. I was blown away. And then since then, I studied many photographs from the Battle of the Kursk. And what you see today, so most of my collection is Battle of the Kursk, because that's the battle I was following. And I also realized I need to learn about photo reconnaissance, photo interpretation. So I dig in, and today I just want to share my experience with you and see if it has any value to the story for you. So we're going to basically be looking at some of the German air reconnaissance photos. We're going to dive into possible reasons they were taken. We're going to take a look at what they have to offer and what insight can be gained by looking at this photograph. So a very quick intro into photo reconnaissance. During World War II, it became one of the primary ways to gain intelligence. Literally, millions of photographs were taken by Allies and Axis powers all over the world. And of course, all major theaters of operation. This information was used as the primary source of intelligence to gain information on the whole capabilities and also intentions. And later on, this information combined with other sources of intelligence was used in operation when this information. But while working with this photograph, I also believe they do offer valuable insight and can possibly enhance some of the components of what happened. Because in a way, it is the only primary source of information that is not affected by human nature. The photograph of the battlefield is a photograph of the battlefield. It doesn't show sights. It just shows you what it is. I mean, it might not fit in our narrative of what things happen, but it shows you what happened. It's up to us to really figure out what happened. So we're looking at the Battle of the Kursk. And by the way, the beautiful map was created by Jay when in preparation while working on a good database. I love this map because it's very clean and it is not overwhelmed with all the statistics. But basically, as you already know, by the early spring of 1943, there was a huge salient including a German line of defense. It was 200 kilometers, approximately 200 kilometers long and 130 kilometers wide. And it was actually the purpose of the German offensive of summer of 1943, try to attack simultaneously from north and south, meet somewhere in around Kursk, surround the Soviet armies in Salem, destroy them, and then shorten the front line. It's a very short version, but that basically was the plan. And as I was at the time reading about southern portion of the Battle of the Kursk, that's the area we will be concentrating on. And I also had a chance to circle the areas that the images are coming from. So for instance, if you're looking at Berezov, we'll have a small map and you would be able to see the Berezov. By the way, this is the program, so we'll get there at the end. So in preparation, so you can imagine the immensity of the theater of operation. So in preparation, Luftwaffe took hundreds of flights and they took thousands of pictures. All the pictures were analyzed, and then obviously the information was passed along the German level of command, and we're trying to make a determination on where the Soviet fortifications are what are the Soviet intentions and what their capabilities. Then I was just saying that. So while working with photograph, I noticed that they mostly are two types. So we have a small scale photography covering large areas, but in smaller details, or we have a large scale photography covering smaller area, but giving us much more level of detail. So let's take a look at the example of a small scale photograph. So this photograph was taken on June 17, 1942, about 3 weeks prior to the offensive, which started on July 5th. And it's actually showing us the first Soviet line of defense around the village of Berezov. These type of photographs were perfect for capturing large territories. They were good for making maps or updating system maps. They were good for showing the terrain, specifics of the terrain, and how their fortifications were fitted in the terrain. It would show the overall idea of where the lines of fortifications were, and it also would show you, it would also give you overall feel of the area of operation when the battle would happen. So I have to say that in 1943, when German forces were looking at this photograph, the fact that it's a vertical picture, it took a little bit of adjusting to figure out what you're looking at. Right now, all of us using Google Earth, using maps. So when we see a picture like that, we almost instinctively can figure out major things. So for instance, we can suggest that that's probably a forest, that's probably a ravine, or it could be field, for instance. We see some man-made structures like the roads, or in this case, village of Berezov. And then let's try to take a look at the signs of military activity. So we mentioned the line of defense. Not only the Germans were able to see the first trench system, they could actually count the number of trenches. So in a way, we also can do that. And so when we say multiple trenches, very strong fortifications, it sounds really nice. But when I first saw that and was able to actually count the lines of the trenches, it was quite revealing that things are a little bit more complicated than we would say the extensive argument of trenches. Just right below it is actually two anti-tank ditches. In most literature, there's a mention of one. So when I saw this photograph and I saw the second one, it was also quite interesting as well. You can probably do separate studies just on Soviet fortifications based on all the photographs that Germans took. We know there were the hundreds of kilometers of anti-tank ditches. This is literally, so if you go, so this flight had about 30 photographs, and they go along the first line of defense. If you follow it, you can see the continuity of the anti-tank ditches, and some of them were placed rather questionably, but in this particular case, it's a perfect location. We have for the anti-tank ditch to be effective, it has to be anchored on both sides with the area that would be unattackable for the armor. So in this case, we have one ravine, we have a second ravine, and then we have a road. So the way Germans were forced to use, they were forced to use the road because it was the only road. But then again, the Soviets put this ditch perfectly. And if you think, they also went through the ravine, so they were suspecting that the Germans would go around. So they even put the anti-tank ditch through the ravine. Well, I was thinking it would be nice to see the village of Berezov, because when I try to magnify, no matter how much I would try, the quality would go away. So what do you know? Germans actually did took a photograph of the village of Berezov, and not just took the photograph. The flight actually was following along the road, and then they actually went to the second line of defense. But the next photograph you can see is not the enlargement of this photograph, but actually a set of it. We also forgot about the combat outposts. So I also noticed that the trench systems that were not connected to each other, and then later on I realized these are combat outposts. We will see them a little bit later. So this particular picture was taken on June 15th. Again, this is not an enlargement. This is an actual photograph. As you can see, it covers much smaller area and gives us more details. Right? So we know from the Soviet record that this strong point was set up for all-around defense. I'm thinking, okay, all-around defense. Let's just begin. Let's see what it means. Well, as you can see, compared to the other photograph, we can clearly see the trench. And what's interesting is that you can see individual firing beats from both sides of the trench. So I thought, well, that's quite compelling sign of around events. So if the Germans attacking, let's say, from the west, or they attack from the east, depending on how the battle goes, I guess it gives the Soviets ability to fire from both sides. There is another entity which lies to the west of the Berezov. And again, look at it. So in the previous photograph, we just saw the white line. Here, if we wish, we can probably even measure the dimensions of the pitch. And look at that. We even can see the temporary crossing point that Russians had to build to allow for the traffic over the ditch. And then I thought, well, there's an interesting area around on the east of it. So let's see what we have to the east. So we can see individual squad positions, and we can even see individual energy positions. So isn't it nice for the commander when you attack, you know, oh, by the way, there's going to be a machine gun nest right there, and not just one, but possibly two. And then this white area in front of it, it bothered me for a long time. I think, what is that? What significance is the minefield, or what is it? And then a friend of mine, when he looked at the picture, said, I think this is a hot grass. It's June, middle of June, the grass is high, it's blocking your fire, field of fire. So basically, the Soviet soldiers just cut the grass, and you can actually follow the lines of someone is going and cutting the grass is different in a peaceful time. But again, once you spot, once you have this key or an idea what it means, then when you look at the other spots, suddenly the picture starts to, the photo starts to speak to you. You can see more things, and you kind of, so these are the visual clues that when you know what it means, they start to tell the story with the image. But there's always a story between the image. And very often at night when I would look at these images, I would wonder, so the guy who was manning this machine gun, did he survive the battle? Did he survive did he survive the war? Could have been my grandfather. My grandfather was fighting since 1939 to 1945. So there's always a first, so because when we look at the photograph or we read the history book, it just says that the active battle, July 5th, 5 hours, the village of Berezov was taken. But the Battle of Berezov was a combination of someone firing the machine gun, firing the rifle, firing the anti-tank gun. So I often wonder what was the fate of the people who were the battle. Another reason the large-scale photographs were used to identify the targets. So this particular photograph was taken in the area of Pokrovka, just north of the second line of defense. And we can see that the color is a little bit changed, so it was actually pink color. But these markings that you see on the photograph actually are markings of a German photo interpreter who was seated in 1943 after the photograph was taken and marking different defensive positions. So for instance, the reason I'm using black and white enlargement because black and white photograph allows for greater multiplication, but you can clearly see in this case, it's an anti-aircraft battery. So we can see tactical sign for anti-aircraft battery, and we can also see the characteristic square-shaped positioning of the rivetments of the battery. And these are the original German markings. Just a little bit to the north of it, it's a probable mortar battery. And as an indirect fire weapon, it was usually positioned somewhere in ravines or a little bulkers to prevent the detection. And even though there is a special technical sign that in this case, the German PI photo interpreter just used just the line. Just a little bit to the north of it, there's actually a trench system. And again, German PI following the trench system, showing the location of it. But what's interesting, if we look closely, if you remember the trench and the Berezov, the firing pits were very close to each other. Here, they're positioned much farther from each other, and I suspect that since it goes along the road, it could have been either machine guns or anti-tank rifles, because anti-tank rifle was a cheap version of an anti-tank gun. I mean, anti-tank gun, you need a crew, you need the proper positioning, proper training. That was a very cheaply produced weapon. It could be used on a ship. You can basically just two-man crew or even one-man crew. So judging by the size of the revetment and their positioning, it's quite possible that those are anti-tank. right? Which again, to give us an idea of what possibly the Russians were expecting in the sector. And just north of it, we see a beautiful example of artillery battery. Now, I can't really say what type of artillery battery it was, but we can see that the German guys using a proper technical science for their artillery. And we can also see that we can number the number of residents in the position. It's a little bit repetitive. It's another example of target identification, but this is a very unique photo. I've seen more than 1,200 of them connected to Battle of Kursk, but it's the first time when the targets are not just marked, but they're also numbered. I suspect it's because they were using some sort of target file that was passed along into artillery units or the buffer units for the further targeting campaign. So again, let's take a look what we can see. This is actually a field gun battery. Surprisingly, instead of 4 guns, it's only 3 guns. But what's interesting is that it's number 535. And if you can see those little black dots inside, it means actually we can see the field guns inside this position. So we would call it an occupied position. Just below is what appears to be a heavy mortar battery. If you remember in the previous photo, the light or medium mortar battery was positioned in the 6 in the line. Here, the relative is much bigger. They circle and they have very characteristic bat wing, little bat wings right here on the side of it. Again, it's positioned away from the road. It's tucked in some sort of field behind the road. So that's why I suspect it's probably a mortar and not a direct fire weapon. I was doing this presentation to one of my friends, and he said, "What is SG?" I said, "I have no idea." But obviously it has some meaning. But I would like to do more digging because I'm always curious what's the German code interpreter was thinking when he was making those notations. Obviously it had some significance, so I would like to know where it is. But if you look below, you see the 3 rabbits along the road in very interesting technical sign. This is the technical sign probably was used to identify the probable positions for multiple rocket launcher systems, or so-called starting organs or katyushas, how they call them in Russian. They're located right next to the road, so they would be hiding somewhere, using the road, positioning themselves, fire, and so just as rapidly going back, because Germans undoubtedly would know where it is and they would try to counterattack the fire that position and try to destroy it. Here is already a familiar site. It's anti-aircraft battery. It's unoccupied. But what's interesting here is that this position is not numbered. So from a technical point of view, so we have a concentration of different type of weaponry here. And the Soviets obviously thought that they was important because they put an independent anti-aircraft battery in case Germans would try to attack again. And just north of it, we see a probable howitzer battery position. Now, I think it's a howitzer again because it's practically away from the road, the size of the revetment, and we can see the technical sign for the artillery. And actually, there is a different technical signs for field gun, howitzer, anti-tank gun, but in this case, the PI just using the regular sign for artillery. And last but not least, the little sign in the bridge. So the bridges have their own technical signs actually. Now the significance of that bridge cannot be overstated. It was pretty much the only road going from the main line of from the main strong point of Chakaska going north. So this bridge probably could have been a target, but most likely what would happen, the German PIs would study it closely and try to determine the weight capacity of the bridge to see if it could withstand the weight of the German armor. And in case if it wasn't strong enough, they probably would make some sort of preparation to move engineered persons forward to try to reinforce the bridge. Here is another, so this is a unique photograph. The reason it's unique because even though we have thousands of pictures of the area of the Battle of the Kursk, between July 5th and July, let's say 20th, on the southern portion, there's only few pictures of the actual area of the combat. And the reason is, during the combat, the support for the actual combat area would be shifted to the visual reconnaissance, and the photo reconnaissance would be shifted away from the battle zone to the rear area to try to detect Soviet reinforcements. So the flights would be flown along the railroad lines or the road to try to determine where the Soviets bring in their reinforcement and how they're doing it. So it's about 10, 15 kilometers right now north of the German advance. I looked really hard and I really wanted to find reinforcements or some sort of movement until one day I realized, well, again, don't laugh, but this little dots, that's probably a Soviet convoy. And this is what German photo interpreter would be looking at and then try to figure out what it is. Is it an armored unit? Is it just a supply unit? Is it trying to enter the highway or exit the highway? It would be pretty hard to get this information just from the picture. But then again, they would use POW interrogations. They would use radio intercepts, try to gain this little clues, little ideas. Maybe there was a call sign that was used over the ear in open. They would try to figure out what unit it is, what the position of the unit, and possibly even the direction of the movement and where this unit was supposed to start. Well, let's just go back to this. This is the enlargement of the very first aerial I showed you. And what I'm trying to do here is it's taken on June 17th, but let's try to figure out how this information could have helped Germans in preparing for the attack on July 5th, and what information can we possibly gain, if any, from analyzing this photograph. Well, first of all, we can now clearly identify the first trench system of the Soviet line of defense. We know the unit that was protecting it. So remember, the Germans would also use the large-scale photographs of their largeness to augment this information we see here. We can see terrain, we can also figure out the German line of defense. As you can see, and that was actually is documented in many places, the distance between the lines was significant, sometimes 5 to 6 kilometers. There was only few roads leading to the Soviet side, and because of the distance, the Soviets had to establish the line of outposts to keep an eye on the German movement. So again, when I read about, oh, there was outpost around high 218.1, but when I saw it for the first time, I was like, wow. So not only I can read it, but I can see it. Here's the road, the outpost covered actually pretty much the whole approach to the road. There's another one, there's another one. So they were strategically very well placed on the map, and they were doing their job. So in case of the German attack, the purpose of outposts would be to engage the Germans and give the main line of defense enough time to prepare for the attack. Well, you also can see the dilemma the Germans were facing. They were unable just to jump and attack. So this outpost had to be taken. So they probably had two choices: either do it during the day and lose the element of surprise, but have an advantage of having artillery support and aerial support, or do during the night, have an element of surprise, but basically no preparation. And that's what they chose to do. They actually moved at night. In the early hours on July 5th, special groups or battalions, actually, in some cases, battalion strength, they moved in pitch black, and they took this outpost in a very hard combat. It was high intensity combat. It's interesting. I was reading German records and Soviet records. They describe it a little bit differently. Germans said we came in and took us only 2 hours with the string grenades, and well, I'm paraphrasing. And then the Soviet records, oh, it was 5 or 6 hours battle, and which again, I'm not trying to diminish. It just when you just base your opinion based on the records, there's obviously bias on the German and the Soviet side. But when you start to see things everywhere, it hopefully gives you some additional clues to see what could have happened. So when I interpret the German account and Soviet account, I take it some parts more seriously, and some parts you probably start to question. And what's interesting, so after the Germans took this outpost, at 4 o'clock in the morning, at 3:15, German time, there was a big preparatory artillery fire. And while this fire was happening for 45 minutes, the main German forces actually moved towards the outpost and then used them as a counter-assault position for the actual attack that happened in July at 4 o'clock in the morning. And it was interesting. So this little area, this second independent field, 20.5. So for instance, it's only 700 meters, but it took Germans 5 hours. They used their famous tiger tanks. One of the tiger tank commanders was Michael Wittmann. So it took 11 tigers and a company of assault guns and 2 battalions of German infantry 5 hours to cross the 700 meters, and actually have a separate photograph, large scale, that shows that area. But it's just it's a different presentation in itself. But the abundance of records and these photographs allow us to take a different look at what might have happened. And here, as I described, that was the main line of attack. And again, because of the record that we have, we can probably suspect that it's more or less the directions they took. And as you can tell, they were following the lines most of the time of the combat output. So this is what we can do with one photograph. But the beauty of a photo reconnaissance is that we have 2 pictures of the same area taken over time, then we have ability to detect change. And detecting change gives you ability to figure out what is happening. So most commonly that was used in determining the bombing accuracy. You would have a target, you take a picture of the target, you have a bombing rate, then you send another reconnaissance flight, they put a picture of the area, and then you carefully compare how the target was before and after. And very often what the bomber command will tell you, oh, we completely destroyed it. And then you look at the images and say, well, we have to go again, and possibly again, and possibly again. It wasn't as prevalent in the German case, but I wanted to see, because of the lines were continuously changing, but I wanted to see if I can spot if I can use this technique in any way to interpret the events of the battle. So again, this is the same flight that the photograph we took when we were using to detect the movement of reinforcements, but in this case, with farther south. So this is July 7th, beginning the 3rd day. This is Zurablini Wood, this little settlement. I don't see, but right here, it should be the village of Berezov. So we're literally just 2 kilometers north of the main strong point of the first Soviet line of defense. And from Soviet records, I've been reading that they placed several artillery systems around the edge of this forest to provide cover and fire for the first line of defense. So I thought it would be nice to take a look, see if I can find something. And maybe if I like it, I have another picture. And actually we did. We do have a photograph from August 7th of the same area. And I thought, well, if we can, so it basically covers the area. And again, that's the difference between small scale photograph and a large scale photograph. So it would be nice to see if we can spot something. Well, that's how primitive my approach was. And so right now we're looking at an enlargement of the original photograph from July 7th of the Zurablini Wood. Well, I couldn't spot any position, to be honest with you. I saw a lot of signs of fighting. You see some black marks and what looked like fork marks. But then after the close examination, I spotted the loop, something like of some sort of a position. But even with large identification, I had a hard time figuring out what that position. I could see some fork marks again, possible artillery fire or aerial bombardment signs. But I needed to take a look at the August 7th. And again, when you look at August 7th, right away the distance are apparent. So suddenly, not only we can see that it's indeed a specific position, we can number each rabbitman, and we can actually even see the sign of the damage. So for instance, I identified at least 5 of these rabbitmen were possibly a direct hit or near misses. So for instance, this particular rabbitman had a direct hit. And you can see the side of the crater is almost as big as the rabbitman itself. So most likely it was delivered by super knife bomber. and it was a deliberate attack on this particular position. Reverend number 6 had a near miss, but again, to judging by the size of blast wave itself, probably attracted the personnel and the equipment in the gravity. I also want to say that looking at the position, and if you remember our other image, we have a similar revetment next to the road. Same here, we have a perfect line along the road. We have a forest, so most likely it was a probable multiple battery. They were somewhere in the forest. They would exit the forest, line up along the road, do their fire, and then go back. Now, I have to say, I'm not sure if they were actually firing when Germans found the area. Obviously, Germans secret effort to do that, but it's hard to say whether they keep actual equipment inside those revetments because we don't have any. I don't have any proof that they couldn't go there. But if it was, we can determine that 5 out of 8 positions were directly near misses. I mean, that was pretty effective. Because what's interesting, there's a lot of Soviet accounts when soldiers would say it felt like German bombers would come wave after wave after wave. It almost seemed it was a never-ending wave of German bombers and constant bombardment. So it's just a little example of what could have happened in this particular case and how we can use repeated coverage of the same area to try to get additional clues on what might happen. And I bet if you dive deeper in the Soviet accounts, you probably could find the mention in the particular unit that was positioned here. And of course, we have to talk about Prokhorov. I mean, everybody, I don't know how many books are written on this subject, and what's interesting with all this, I don't know, hundreds of books, not that many actually went and looked at this photograph was available, and actually it's narrow, but I don't know that many people who actually did and went and looked at this photograph and tried to see if it was any help to try to interpret the battle of the Prokhorov. So let's try to see what we can spot on this photograph. So we know that this is Belgorod, Prokhorov railroad line. The Germans are moving across the railroad, in that direction. We have a Shell River, and this is our field 252.2 and collective farm of Kazakhstan. The reason I want to point that, and again, remember yesterday at the evening I told you, it's always the spot that you need either has a cloud or like this is unique for it could give us an idea of 18 tank corps that was attacking along these lines, which actually misunderstood part of the attack. And what do we have? We have a part of the picture actually missing that would actually show it. But what's important is to see that the distance between railroad line and river shore was only about 4 kilometers. So sometimes when we think about Battle of Prokhorov, we think about endless fields filled with thousands of tanks, when in reality, even though the fighting was happening above the road, most of it was happening in this little corridor of 4 kilometers long. And if we can be very precise, the most described event, the attack of 29.4, actually happened right here along the field 252. And the distance between the narrowest distance between the collective farm and the railroad line was only about 800 meters. So even though you could put all these hundreds of tanks, at some point you have to the terrain determine where the tanks will point. So we're also lucky to have actually the photograph with the sortie that took the previous large scale photograph also went along the railroad line. It took the photograph of the particular area. And as we can see, we have overlap from August 7th. So what I would like to do, I'd like to look at the July 16th image and try to compare it with August 7th. One more thing about July 16th. So the battle happened on July 12th. But the tank charge happened on July 12th. The battlefield stayed largely in German hands for 4 days. So the Germans, they moved away from the area on the next day, July 17th. But from July 12th to July 16th, the area was in German hands. The significance of that is that Germans, just as Russians, are really good at removing damaged equipment. So whoever had possession of the field would remove the equipment and have a chance to repair it and then put it back into action. So the significance of that photograph is that wherever possible armored vehicles we can see in the field, most likely would be Russians, would be Soviet, because Germans would have a chance in 4 days to remove their equipment away. So let's see if we can spot anything on the original photograph. So we're gonna look at this little triangle and see if we can, here's our triangle. So this is a small scale photograph. This is our first attempt to enlarge it. We have a railroad line, we have a field, 2.2, famous painting. And if you can see it right here, the collective farmer of Kavinsky. And that's the road that went from the Kavinsky to. So this is the possible German defense line, and this is the shack for the 29 tank war on July 12th. So when we try to look at it, all I can see is different type of shapes, dark blotches, if you will, on the map. So we obviously need to take another alignment. So now we're going to enlarge this area right next to the anti-tank ditch and the railroad line. Well, a little bit better. This is probably as far as we can enlarge it without starting to have distortions. But we can see that some objects are sticking out, some objects probably on identification. But still, if I would press you, can you please identify any tanks? And does it have any relevance to our discussion or trying to figure out what happened? You would be hard pressed to say, I don't know, Eugene, I don't really see any tanks. Well, what if we use the photograph from all the 7? And again, it's a perfect example when we are lucky to have not only the coverage from July 15, but also a later coverage, because very often you only have a coverage in the area once, and then you have to make the deal with what you have. So I took 4 random objects, well, not very random, but I took 4 objects on July 16 photograph, and I tried to match them on all the 7. In this case, right away, it becomes apparent that object 1 seems to be greater. And judging by the size, most likely a big caliber bomb delivered by a close support aircraft. The object 2, even though on an image from July 16, it looked as a bulging object, it's actually also a crater. And again, the screen doesn't do justice. It would be much more clear if you see it on a digital screen. But we can also see some sort of shape below, box shape below the crater. Then the object number 3 is just a shape, a box shape between the railroad line and the road. And object number 4 is a random object form, and not very random, but the object only field, and it appears to be box shape. So we can see that. So suddenly the objects that we see on a small scale folder from July 15 start to appear differently when we compare them with a large scale photography. What I suspect that these little box shaped objects are probably armored vehicles. The reason we can say we can guess is because the size or difference between length and width. In armored vehicle would be 2-to-1, and it was a truck that would be 3-to-1. And in this case, it's probably 2-to-1. So if you would ask me, Eugene, can we see any tanks? I would say we'll probably see armored vehicles. The fact that the battlefield was in German hands for 4 days could point to the fact that it's probably Soviet nature, unless it was a German one that was completely destroyed and they didn't see any reason to take it out. So what we can do then, we can apply this approach to the rest of the battlefield, because where we have repeated coverage of July 16 and August 7, and try to determine what dots on that July 16 map possibly represent the tanks. And if majority of these dots armored fighting vehicle and majority of them are Soviet, to count them, it might give us some better understanding of what indeed happened in July 12. Well, today we covered the German aerial reconnaissance photography. I hopefully showed you the little clues, visual clues that we saw in how we can use them. I do believe that they provide a unique context and framework for better understanding of what is happening. And I have to say, this sort of information, the primary information, is virtually untapped. So, and that's what's so exciting. In a time when we go to the same sources and we look at them and we try to reimagine or reinterpret them, there is a completely untapped source of primary information that could be used and possibly should be used in historical research that can give you that concludes my presentation. I want to thank you.
I have a question. The Germans are certainly, to judge from all these photographs, certainly aware of the extensive Soviet defensive preparations. In your reading about this, did this not give the Germans pause at some point to show that the Soviets were expecting them right there, right when they were attacking?
That's a great question. Well, the Germans in a way had no choice but to attack. So I would say, despite all they knew, they had to press on. What really helped them is the excellent close support coordination between the infantry, armor, artillery, and close air support. And I think the example of suppressing the artillery battery near Berlin would shows you that they had no choice. They put target tanks up front. They surround them by assault guns. They press on. They had to break through no matter what. But surprisingly, even if you look, let's say, at the Tiger losses on the first day, they were considerable, but they were not complete losses. Most of them were repaired and appeared, if not next day, but 3-4 days later. But they had to use that power. That's why they had 3 divisions against pretty much 1 Soviet division. There was Soviets had basically no chance of stopping them. But what's interesting is that Germans went along, the lack of infantry to cover their flanks, that was the biggest downfall. And they were like a knife cutting through, but the cut was thinner and thinner and thinner, and then they basically ran out of forces to protect the flanks, which invited Soviet armor counterattacks. They were chipping in.
I have a question.
Yes.
Did Soviets take similar photographs?
Awesome question. Yeah. I also would like to know. I found a few examples, and they were from 1944. There is rumors on the internet that they did, but we have no way of knowing. I would love to see them, but again, what difference would it make? It would be nice to know their capability, but since they dig in, I guess they were just expecting they expected to hit hard, they would be hit hard, and they I don't know how much it would help them, even if they knew like,
Oh,
yeah,
I've already seen it.